The lighthouse at the edge of nowhere. The year was 1923, and the last ferry to Morrow Island had already left. Eleanor Voss stood at the dock, her leather suitcase dampening in the October mist, watching the boat's lantern shrink into the gray Atlantic water like a dying ember. She had missed it by 4 minutes. 4 minutes that would change everything. She turned back toward the small coastal town of Harwick, a place so forgotten by maps that locals joked you had to want to get lost to find it. The cobblestone streets were slick and quiet. The fishermen had already gone in for the evening. Somewhere above the fog, a bell buoy rang its slow, mournful rhythm. Dong, dong, dong. Eleanor had come here for one reason, the lighthouse, not to work it, not to visit someone. She had come because 3 weeks ago, in a secondhand bookshop in Boston, she had found a journal, old, water-stained, its leather cover soft as skin, tucked between an encyclopedia of tides and a cookbook nobody wanted. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Aldrich Wren, a lighthouse keeper who had tended the Morrow Island light from 1887 until the autumn of 1901, when he had simply vanished. No boat was found, no note, no body. The journal, however, had ended mid-sentence. Tonight the light showed me something I was not meant to see, and I understand now why they say the sea has a memory. I have decided to walk down to the water at... That was all. Eleanor had read those lines perhaps 100 times since finding the journal. She was a historian by training, a skeptic by nature, and yet something about those words had settled into her, the way cold settles into old stone, deep and permanent, and impossible to warm away. She found shelter that night at a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Calvert, who had the kind of face that had once been beautiful and had simply deepened with age rather than faded. Mrs. Calvert set a bowl of clam chowder before Eleanor without being asked, as though she had been expected. "You've got the journal," Mrs. Calvert said. It was not a question. Eleanor looked up slowly. "I'm sorry?" The old woman sat down across from her, folding her hands on the table the way a person does when they are about to tell you something they have been holding for a very long time. "Thomas Wren had a daughter," she said. "Her name was Ida. She was 7 years old when he disappeared. She's been gone 30 years herself now, God rest her." Mrs. Calvert paused, looking at the window where the fog pressed gently against the glass. "But, before she died, Ida told me that her father had sent the journal away, mailed it to a friend in Boston. She said he did it the morning of the day he vanished, that he seemed calm, too calm, like a man who has made peace with something." Eleanor set down her spoon. "She also said," Mrs. Calvert continued, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper, "that the lighthouse, on certain nights like tonight, when the fog comes in from the northeast, still shows a light, and that the light isn't there to guide ships." "What is it there for?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Calvert looked at her steadily. "To guide people." That night, Eleanor lay in the narrow boarding house bed and listened to the town settle into sleep around her. The old timbers groaned. A cat moved somewhere below the floorboards. The bell buoy rang and rang and rang, and she found herself counting the intervals between each toll. 4 seconds, then 5, then 4 again, until the numbers dissolved into something softer, something without edges. She thought about Thomas Wren. She imagined him in the lighthouse, night after night, alone on that small island with nothing but the beam of light sweeping the dark water and the sound of the ocean breathing below him. She wondered if loneliness, sustained long enough, changed a person. Not broke them, changed them. opened something in them the way a long silence makes you suddenly aware of sounds you had always been too busy to hear. She drifted. She dreamed, though she would not remember dreaming. In the morning, the ferryman agreed to take her across. His name was August, and he was perhaps 60, with hands like gnarled driftwood and eyes the color of the sea on an overcast day, not quite gray, not quite blue, some color that only existed in that specific kind of light. He spoke very little on the crossing, which took 20 minutes through still, milk-white water. Eleanor stood at the bow and watched Morrow Island emerge from the fog gradually, the way a thought comes to you in the early morning. First just a suggestion, a shape, and then suddenly all of it at once. The island was small, perhaps a mile across, at its widest point. A dirt path led from the dock through wind-twisted pines toward the lighthouse, which stood at the island's northern tip on a bluff above the sea. It was a classic New England tower, white painted brick, black lantern room at the top, a keeper's cottage attached at the base. No one had lived here since 1923, when the Lighthouse Authority had finally automated the lamp. But the paint, Eleanor noticed as she drew closer, was not as faded as it should have been. She stopped on the path. She was perhaps 100 yards away, close enough to see detail. The cottage windows were dark. The door was shut. Nothing moved, and yet there was something about the place that made her slow her breathing. Not from fear, exactly, but from a feeling she could only describe as consideration. As though the lighthouse was looking back at her the way old things sometimes seem to look back at you, measuring something. She walked to the cottage door and found it unlocked. Inside, the air was cool and carried a faint smell she could not immediately identify, something like beeswax and salt water and old paper, layered together into something almost sweet. The furniture was simple: a wooden table, 2 chairs, a cot with a faded quilt, a cast-iron stove. On the table was a mug. Eleanor picked it up and found it was not dusty. She set it down very carefully. On the wall beside the door was a framed photograph she had not noticed at first. She moved closer. It showed a man standing at the base of the lighthouse, squinting slightly against the sun, wearing the dark wool uniform of a lighthouse keeper. He had a quiet face, not handsome or ugly, simply present, like a landscape. On the back of the photograph, in small, precise handwriting, was a name: Thomas Aldrich Wren. September 1901, 1 month before he disappeared. She climbed the lighthouse. The stairs spiraled upward in the way lighthouse stairs do, tight and steep, designed for function and not comfort, the kind of climb that makes you acutely aware of your body. She counted 112 steps. At the top, she pushed open the hatch into the lantern room, and the world opened up. The fog had begun to lift. From here she could see the full reach of the island below her, the surrounding sea, and, far to the south, the faint suggestion of the mainland. The light mechanism itself was a classic Fresnel lens, its glass prism still intact, still beautiful, like a frozen chandelier. She moved around it slowly, trailing her fingertips near but not touching the glass. And then she saw the notebook. It was sitting on the narrow shelf that ran around the inside of the lantern room, so perfectly placed that it might have been set there that morning. A small brown notebook, different from the journal she had found in Boston. She picked it up. It opened to a page near the middle. The handwriting was the same as in the journal. Thomas Wren's careful, unhurried script. If you are reading this, then the journal found its way to you, as I believed it would. I want you to understand that I am not a man given to fancy. I have kept this light for 14 years, and in that time, I have learned to trust evidence over imagination. what I have seen here has evidence enough. The light on certain nights illuminates something the eye cannot see in darkness or an ordinary day. I cannot explain the mechanism. I know only what I have observed. On the first such night, I saw the island as it was before any of us came to it. Older, greener, with no lighthouse and no dock, only the rock and the sea and the wind, and the stars arranged in a pattern I did not recognize. On the second such night, I saw the island as it will be, long after all of us are gone. Still here, still solid, the sea still moving around it. That was, I confess, a comfort I did not expect. On the third such night, I saw Eleanor turn the page. It was blank. She turned the next page. Blank. She flipped through the rest of the notebook rapidly, holding it up to the light coming through the lens. Every page was empty except for the one she had read. She turned back to it and read the last line again. On the third such night, I saw the foghorn sounded from somewhere out at sea, a long, low note that moved through the lantern room and through her chest and out the other side, leaving a silence that felt different from the silence before it. Eleanor lowered the notebook. She looked out at the water. The fog was returning. She did not take the afternoon ferry back. She told herself it was because she wanted more time to document the cottage. She told herself it was professional curiosity, historical responsibility, the due diligence of a scholar. She arranged these reasons carefully in her mind, like furniture placed to make a room feel larger than it is. But the truth she would only admit to herself much later, lying in the cot in the keeper's cottage, while the October wind moved around the lighthouse with a sound like breathing, was simpler. She wanted to see the light come on. The evening came slowly, the way evenings do on islands, where the horizon is wide enough to show you every stage of the sun's going. The sky went from white to pale gold to a deep, bruised rose that reflected off the water in trembling fragments. The first stars appeared. The air dropped in temperature so gradually that Eleanor did not notice she was cold until she was very cold. She had built a fire in the cottage stove. She sat in one of the wooden chairs with a blanket around her shoulders and the brown notebook in her hands, reading and rereading those final lines. The fire made small, patient sounds. She was nearly asleep when the light came on. She felt it before she saw it, a warmth, faint and sourceless, that moved through the wall of the cottage the way sunlight moves through a thin curtain. She stood up. Through the cottage window she could see the lantern room above, and in it, a light. Not the automated flash that the modernized system produced, not a mechanical repetition. This was a slow, even breathing glow, the same warm gold as the fire behind her, sweeping with perfect steadiness across the water. Eleanor walked out of the cottage. She stood in the cold grass at the base of the lighthouse and tipped her head back and looked up at the light. It moved across her face. Once, twice, steady and slow and very old. She climbed the stairs. 112 steps. She did not count them this time. She pushed open the hatch. The light was running. The Fresnel lens was turning, though there was no motor running and no power connected. She had confirmed that herself in the afternoon. The light threw its beam outward across the fog-softened water, and where the beam passed over the sea's surface, she could see. She stood very still. She breathed. She understood in that moment why Thomas Wren had seemed calm on the last morning of his life. Why Ida had said he seemed like a man who had made peace with something. She understood what he had seen on the third night, and she understood why he had not been able to write it down, not because there were no words, but because words would have been the wrong kind of container. Some things are not meant to be carried in language. Some things are only meant to be seen. She stood in the turning light for a long time. The bellbuoy rang far below on the dark water. Dong, dong, dong. The sea moved in its slow, enormous way, indifferent and ancient and impossibly patient. Eleanor Voss closed her eyes, and the light kept turning. What did she see? The notebook was found in the Harwick Historical Society archives in 1951, donated anonymously. Eleanor Voss returned to Boston in the autumn of 1923 and wrote several well-regarded papers on New England lighthouse history. She never wrote about Morrow Island. She returned to the island every October for the rest of her life. She never said why. Sleep now. The water is still. The light is steady. You are safe and warm, and the night is long. Let go of the day. Let it drift out like a boat from a dock, growing smaller, smaller, until you can't quite make it out anymore. The bellbuoy rings. Dong, dong, dong. You are somewhere between the island and the mainland now, carried gently on still water, and the fog is soft around you, and there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Just rest. Just breathe. The light keeps turning. End.